Welcome. You have just tuned into Elevated Resonance with Daniel. Celebrate a life worth living. Hi, I'm Daniel Rutschmann.
And this is Dr. Pat.
Together, we will explore some aspects of the scientific foundation of what it means to be a conscious creator and get inspired to take action on creating a life worth living. I bring a unique blend of expertise to my work, leveraging an in-depth knowledge of concepts in neuroscience and the science of resilience, as well as over 20 years of experience in the corporate world and of what makes organizations successful. Know that it is possible for you to create a life, a team, or an organization that you truly want, despite the circumstances in your outer world. Are you ready to embrace change and celebrate a life worth living? Then this show is for you. Elevated Resonance with Daniel starts now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. What a great show Daniel has prepared for all of us. I really mean all of us, not just for you, but all of us. You are listening to Elevated Resonance. And how do you celebrate a life worth living? And, to do that, Daniel, I love that we're talking about the role of the brain because we have many, many different parts of us as human beings, right? And we could spend a lot of time doing that. But today we're talking about the role of the brain. And let's just talk about it. We talked about what the role of the brain is last time when we talked about resilience. Tell us a little bit about that. But the brain does more than just resilience, right?
Yeah. In summary, the quick answer is it's involved in everything we do, right? So, our brain is such an amazing piece of machinery, and it has evolved over, millions of years tremendously. And there are parts in our brain that we have today that very, very early ancestors of us didn't have. And that's also some of the differences we see when we look at other mammals. So the human brain has about 100 billion nerve cells, 100 billion neurons. Think about that. And then each of those little nerve cells has on average about 10,000 connections to other neurons. So there's a lot of information flowing, right? And it's an electric brain. This is electricity flowing through it. And funny enough, I didn't know this until I started looking into this topic. It takes about until age of 25 until our brain has fully developed. Obviously, our brain changes throughout our whole life. At least ideally it does, unless we get really stuck somewhere. But there's certain parts of our brain capacity, particularly the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex, that will develop until the age of 25 to its full capacity. And without going into details, there's a lot of things when it comes to the different stages of life, particularly from early childhood to becoming an adult, how different parts of the brains are more dominant or not there at all yet, or not really activated or used. So that's super important to know. Now, we all know that when we think about our brain, right, we know the brain is always involved when we think about things or ponder about things. But the interesting thing is the brain is also involved in everything that goes on in the body and literally everything that's happening around us, with us. So that is, for example, how we communicate, how we make decisions. That's the brain. How we move our body. That is the brain, is involved in that. How we digest, right? Even sleeping, when we sleep, the brain is involved in that. And last but not least, also the emotions are directly controlled by the brain for the most part, heavily influenced by that. So now, going back to the question that you asked initially, the brain is involved in every aspect of our life. That's really the summary of that.
Yeah. I coach people on, let me just call it media, but I really love to coach people on speaking. So I developed a system called SED. And I was shocked as I prepared for the show today. I could hear you in my mind. I literally could hear you say what you were just saying. And then I could see how it manifested in the training.
Mhm.
And it manifests in so many different ways. So that's why I love that you said the brain is like doing everything. And when we do that though, I want people to know that it really is involved in everything we do. And yet we don't always think that that's true, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, you could basically say that the brain has something to do or influences how we experience life. 100%. Um, One of the most recognized leaders and researchers in this field that I highly admire is Dr. Bruce Lipton, that a lot of you probably heard of. And he said once, the function of the mind is to create coherence between our beliefs and the reality we experience. So, in other words, the life we experience is a direct reflection of the state of our mind. And mind, sometimes I get asked, so what is the difference between the mind and the brain? To me, the brain is the circuitry and the mind is the brain in action. So when the brain fires and does something and processes information, that is the mind. So maybe we look a little bit deeper into the makeup of the brain and
Yeah.
how it really influences how we experience life and how we create life and what life is about. So if we make it very simple, we can break down the brain into three main areas. They're sometimes also called the three brains. The first one is our neocortex. It's a large part right on top of our head, right here. And the neocortex is the thinking brain because it's the seat of our conscious awareness. This is where we record everything we learn and experience in our life, right? So a big part of the memory is in there. It's a reflection of everything we know in our outer environment, how we interact and go through our life. So this is fundamentally the part of our brain that learns the information, right? So the neocortex is what plugs us into this reality through our five senses. And so when information comes through our senses, we might read a book or someone says something. You're listening to an amazing podcast or TV show, right? You're learning new information. That information comes through your five senses and floods the brain. And that's your neocortex, first of all. And so when you hear new information or learn new information, you interact with that information, and that causes circuitry in your brain to assemble into new patterns and combinations. And that's called a neurological network, or you create new synaptic connections. So the brain is constantly evolving and moving. So we learn new information, and now everybody has gone through this studying for an exam or test. You learn new information, and unless you continue to repeat the information, it will not stick. Because initially there is this tiny little fragile neurological network where a few neurons connect together. But when you repeat it over time and time and time again, this network becomes bigger and thicker and stronger. And that's how we remember things.
Yeah.
That's why the neocortex really you can think of as the thinking brain. So that's
Yeah.
the first brain of the three. The
Yeah.
second one, which sits right underneath in the middle of our head, is the limbic system or limbic brain, which we can think of as the chemical emotional brain because it's directly responsible to create our emotions. And so we talked about this before in one of the last episodes, where the autonomic nervous system controls about 90% of our bodily functions. Now, guess what? The limbic system is the seat of the autonomic system, of the autonomic nervous system. Everything in there controls, the limbic system controls most of the things that are happening in the autonomic nervous system, including our chemical functions. And often I get asked, so what is an emotion really, right? We feel something. Physiologically, it's a chemical reaction in the body. And that part of our brain, that limbic system, triggers the body to release certain hormones and certain chemicals in the body. It signals certain centers in our body to release certain, easiest way to say it, it's chemicals, right?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of different types. There's about 1,500 biomarkers that are related to positive emotions and 1,500 different biomarkers that you can measure that are related to negative emotions. The limbic brain is what triggers that. And
Yeah.
that's why the limbic brain you can call the feeling brain. Now, the last piece, and that is very important. So we learn the information with the neocortex, our thinking brain, and then we start to apply the information and we have an experience, and then the limbic brain creates the emotion that is associated with it, right? And so think about learning how to ride a bike. You start out and it's all a bit bumpy and you might fall off, it doesn't work, you lose your balance, but then you get the hang of it and you start to ride, and now you can make curves and jump off the curb and things like that. So the more you do that over and over again, the more you do something and practice something, that information starts to become really second nature to us, right? And that gets to the point where the body knows how to do it better than the conscious mind.
Yeah.
It's like riding a bike. We're not thinking about it. We can have a
Yeah.
conversation with someone driving a car. Who's driving the car?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But
this
isn't
is
that why we use that phrase? I mean, how often, I mean, you've heard this a million times. And people say, come on, it's like riding a bike. You just get, I mean, because what they're saying is, so much effort goes into learning how to ride a bike. I just want to be
exactly.
clear, especially if you learn when you're young, you're learning at a very delicate
Hmm.
age how to do something that requires your mind,
Hmm.
brain. It requires basically all your senses. You're 5, 6 years old and you're given this thing that's going to go down the street, right?
Totally.
Everything comes up. You're afraid you may fall. And people say, it's just like, Pat, just go do it. It's like riding a bike. And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, you just don't know my bike experience. Maybe you should use that. But the point that I think the point that I think you're making though is we have a powerful, powerful way to call upon the brain, the mind, for
Yeah.
many, many, many things in life.
Yeah, and it's so important to understand that how does different pieces of the brain work together, right? So the last part, when you learn a skill and it becomes second nature, it is stored in your cerebellum, also referred to as the hindbrain. It sits in the back, and this is the thickest, densest part of our brain, even though it's not the largest part of our brain, but it holds a lot of the neurological power that we have. Now, this is a big part of our subconscious. So the cerebellum is the seat of our skills, like riding a bike, driving a car, but also our habits and our unconscious beliefs and hardwired attitudes and emotional reactions. And so the way those three brains work together is really what influences and dictates how our life looks like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And yeah.
I'm telling you, it's shocking. I have to pull some information together because I'm doing an event. So I pulled some pictures
Hmm.
together, but I pulled the pictures of an experience I had not too long ago of being in a music video,
Hmm.
right? With John Legend.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at the pictures and I had a moment where I stopped, Daniel. Maybe you can explain how the three brains work together. But I had this moment as I'm looking and I'm saying, man, you look like you were having fun. And yet at the same time, I remember how petrified and intimidated I was.
Yeah.
So I'm watching these really cool pictures, but then I'm feeling like it was one of the scariest things I've ever done.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you think about those three brains, their function is really to help us, or it enables us to go from thinking to doing to being or
Mm,
becoming. And so it all starts with the neocortex, where new information is learned. That is what plugs us into this reality. Now think about this, and this is sometimes a trippy exercise to do. Think about you took away all your senses. You're not seeing anything, not hearing anything, you're not smelling, not tasting, not feeling anything. You wouldn't have any experience of this reality here. Zero. You wouldn't experience any of the three-dimensional reality around us. The only thing that would be there is consciousness, your conscious awareness. You would be aware of what is going on without using your senses. So it's not like that being aware of, oh, I'm hearing something, right? It's not like I'm closing my eyes and hearing. No, it's this, you're in the nothing. You're completely disconnected from the three-dimensional reality, but you're still you.
Oh my gosh.
So-
I worked at Bell Labs, really short story, but I worked at the most genius people. And Bell Labs, of course, develop all of our sound for our phones, but
Uh-huh.
they had a special room.
Mm-hmm.
It was a room where there was no sound. And in fact, there was nothingness in it. And I got to go in that room. And I think it was the closest I think I came to what you just described, because there was
Mm-hmm.
something about what they were created that
Mm-hmm.
neutralized several of
Mm-hmm.
our senses.
Mm-hmm.
I never forgot it. I could never go back to that feeling. I didn't know how to do it without that element,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but I never forgot it.
Yeah. There's those float tanks, that I have where you go in there. It's like this big tank. It's like a big tub, but it's
Yeah.
completely closed. And you float. You don't feel your body really, and it has no sound, and you can completely disconnect from the
Yeah.
three-dimensional reality, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And go within. So the neocortex, because all the information that comes through your senses goes to the neocortex, and that is what creates this awareness. Oh, I'm local here in space and time. And so our interaction with the environment, that's how we learn and experience things, right? So the neocortex gathers that information. And then we create new synaptic connections, right? We're learning, we're studying, we're repeating it, etc. But it's at that point, it's all philosophical or theoretical information. That information in the neocortex is void of any experience yet, right? As you read a book about something, about how to build a desk, right? And now you want to do something with that information. So when you start to apply that information, you get your mind and body working together. You have an experience. You start to do something with the information you have learned. And that experience produces an emotion. That's the limbic brain. The second brain comes in there. That produces this powerful chemistry that we associate certain experiences with certain emotions. That's through that learning process. And now that information that comes back through applying the information we have learned enriches the circuits in our brain that are already there with the theoretical information, with the information from actually applying the information. So it becomes enriched and it becomes much, much stronger. And funny enough, the stronger the emotion you feel of an experience they have, the stronger the memory will be, right? That's why the more we get involved with something, the more we get passionate about something, the more we're gonna experience it and have a strong, lasting memory in the
Boy, you're
brain.
so right about that, though. I mean, what you just explained, I love the way you explained this, because I think half the time we don't understand how this all works. So therefore, because we don't understand it, we don't know
Mhm.
what to do about it. If we don't know what to do about it, then we feel lost. We feel stuck. We don't know what's next.
Mm.
But I wonder, if you're listening to this show, is there anything, think about something right now, all you, because when Daniel, when you were talking about this, I came to an emotion that I will never forget. It was so scary, so very scary. It turned out okay,
Mhm.
but anytime I think about the thing that happened, I feel sick inside, right?
Mhm.
But this is really all part of our makeup. Sometimes when we don't understand how this works, we don't know what to do when it doesn't work
Mhm.
well.
Yeah. Very good point, because something happens, there's a strong memory we store in our brain, right? And if we go through the same experience again, we feel the same emotion. So we start to fire and wire the same type of emotions and experiences into our brain. It becomes this really strong association. And so over time, we do this over and over again. We go through life and do the same things the same way. It starts to become a subconscious program, because the more once we do things automatically, remember, this is the third brain, it's in your hindbrain, in your cerebellum. This is where then we have our skills, like riding a bike, driving a car, or how to eat, right? We having a conversation, how to remember first time you used fork and knife. That was pretty difficult. Now it's, you don't even think about it. So the more we experience things, the more those circuits get wired in our brain and then get stored in the cerebellum, which is a lot of our subconscious beliefs and attitudes and behaviors. And this is also why once we get to our mid-30s, studies show that 90% of who we are is a subconscious program, because we spend 30-something years experiencing things over and over again. And now we just automatically respond to things.
Yeah.
Someone says something and there's an association stored and we just react to it in a
No
certain.
kidding.
Now, the
But
good
it,
news
but,
is,
but it
yeah,
also happens now. What Daniel, what you're bringing it up is at the basis for what people are experiencing in the modern day world. And
mhm,
I'm sure we'll talk about this in future shows, but I want to make the point, once upon a time, we did not have as many of the things that you just described that could come at us, hit us, be in front of
mhm,
us as we do today. You cannot turn around. I mean, it's so invasive sometimes that if you watch television, here's what I've had to do. If I watch television, I have to mute the commercials because I am just so aware of how they're telling me how sick I am, how sick I'm
mhm,
going to be. And by the way, if you're really sick, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it except go get this pill.
mhm.
But what you're talking about is so significant to help people in the modern age, isn't it?
Yeah, and the good thing is the way we have programmed ourselves through all those years, consciously or subconsciously, knowingly or unknowingly. The good news is the brain is plastic. That means it can change. Neuroplasticity, right? That's what that is called. So the same way we programmed ourselves into who we are today, the same way we can program ourselves into anyone we want to be. And with that, create a life we truly want. Because the life directly reflects our beliefs and how we do things. And so there is this, you could say, if your core belief is, for example, lack or failure, your brain will find a way to create that reality as your experience. And on the other side, when your core belief is rooted in success and abundance, our brain fixates on creating that experience as our reality. And this is the direct interaction between our state of mind, the way we think and the way we feel, and how life starts to turn out. The simplest thing is, in one of my workshops, I sometimes show this slide and say, you come home, there's nobody there, you make yourself a cup of tea, you sit down on the couch, everything is quiet. Is that, does that mean you're lonely or you have freedom? It's your perception. It's the same situation, but how you experience life 100% depends on how you think and how you feel about things.
Yeah.
And
I
that is
love that.
changeable.
I love that you brought that up because so often now, the way other people see us and the comments we make, some people would say, why are you sitting there by yourself? And I have to
Mhm.
explain to them that on the Myers-Briggs scale, I broke the Myers-Briggs scale. I am such an introvert. Took it 4 times. They couldn't get it to change. I
Wow.
scored so high on the introvert scale. I almost lost my job because
Mhm.
businesses that look at that, they don't do it much now. They
Mhm.
don't understand it. But after a day, give me my couch and
Mhm.
quiet. Not for a
Yeah.
week. Just give me an hour. But what you're saying is there's a part of this that we have to understand what's going on in our brains. That's what I think you're saying. But you also help people with this because a lot of times,
Mhm.
Daniel, right, we can't figure some of this out ourselves.
Yeah, I didn't know this myself and until I started looking into that, and then I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And nobody teaches you that in school
No,
yet. That will
yet.
change, hopefully. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
It's got to
so
change.
yeah, it has.
Data is not going away. Information is not going away.
Yeah,
Now
absolutely.
with I don't even think we know whether it's our brain that put that on the paper.
Yeah. Yeah, and with our company, that's we're one of the people that will try to help and support that process of bringing knowledge like that, what it truly means to change, to people and to organization. So it's really change and transformation is at the heart of what we do at Elevated
Mm,
Resonance, right? We have one program that's called the Neuroscience of Change, where we teach things we talked about today. And it's like, okay, my life is not going to change unless I change because it's a direct reflection of the way I think and feel. Okay, so how do I think? How do I feel? How does that work together? Understanding the dynamic and then learning how to use that to your
yeah,
advantage, so to speak. So you can consciously create a new future self of
yeah,
yourself. And with that, a new life. So that's one thing. Science of resilience is another piece where we dive deep into the science of emotions, right? And along with that, we teach then a full suite of leadership skills that are heavily rooted in those scientific principles that we teach usually up front.
yeah. I have to tell you, let's make sure folks knows you refer to your company, Elevated Resonance, but let's
Hmm.
give out the website because I will tell you that I wish you all would have been around when I had my leadership and organizational development job and had to restructure the
Hmm.
telephone company because none of the things you're talking about
Hmm.
did we understand, nor did we understand the impact of what we were doing, nor therefore did we understand the consequences of it. But that's what you're saying you help people with. How do people find out more about this? Because organizations need you now for this.
Hmm.
They are never going to be able to take the
Hmm.
new workforce, the new people coming into the workforce, and elevate their performance if they don't
Hmm.
understand what you just shared here today. How do they work with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to go to our website, elevatedresonance.com, and you can directly reach out, fill out a contact sheet, have a look through the information that's on the website to get a better understanding of what we do, how we work with organizations. And then we are always happy to have a conversation with people about anything, really. It's very rare that I decline a conversation.
Yeah, I'm like you. Um, it is so important that even something, Daniel, and maybe you'll talk about this, but even something like formal term, psychological contracts. Let me tell you, that's like a little fancy term that means promises.
Hmm.
Psychological contract violation, broken promises.
Hmm.
But to understand them at the level you just talked about, see, what you just described is deeply embedded in a behavior that could either build trust or break it.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you talk about trust in the organizations
Oh
you work
yeah,
with.
yeah. I mean, the number one criteria to create a successful team. Google did a research on this years ago where they tried what makes the perfect team. Number one thing, safety, which is based on trust. You need to
Yeah,
be able to trust each other.
absolutely. Daniel, I love that we're talking about this. Thank you so much. What's your closing message? What do you want to leave us with today?
I want people to know that it's absolutely possible to change your organization, your team, or your life overall. That is absolutely possible, 100%. I've seen too many examples of that. But the most important thing to understand and take with you today is that nothing in your life will change until you change.
Mm.
And that's one part of what we do, helping people to understand how that works.
And Daniel, I can't thank you enough. And I would imagine you are going to be super busy because,
Mm.
according to a friend of mine who is like a super duper executive of one of these Fortune 50 companies, has an entire workforce in chaos in
Mm.
trying to incorporate, implement, manage AI
Mm.
in their business.
Mm.
This is a whole new world. It's like the genie was in the bottle and now it's not. And the implications are not about the technology, are they?
Mhm.
They're
No,
about
it's
all of
not.
us.
Absolutely.
Get on it. Call my friend. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you all out there. Please go back and listen to the show because I want all of you to understand what Daniel said. We have the power within us to really go through so many things in life.
Mhm.
If we understand what Daniel said, and if you don't understand, call him. If you have a boss or a team that you're working with, call Daniel. If you think you'd like to have him speak to your leadership team, management, do a retreat, whatever that is, be proactive about your business. Doesn't matter if you're small, medium, or large, but if you're proactive and you get help and understand elevated resonance, there's no limit to what you can achieve. Daniel, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pat.
And
Appreciate
for
it.
all of you out there, remember, it sits on your head. It's super powerful. We'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Elevated Resonance with Daniel. Celebrate a life worth living. I'm Daniel, and along with Dr. Pat, you have been learning some of the key aspects of how to navigate towards your vision of the future by creating and living your best self every day. Tune in every first Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time or 2 p.m. Eastern Time to become better in coping with the demands and challenges of everyday life. For more information about this show and how I can support you, visit my website, elevatedresonance.com.